Please. My wife's at the tent.
Chris Sanders writes, directs, and has a small role in Blood Witch. Sanders has previously brought us demons, vampires, and werewolf movies, a few of which I have reviewed. And here he turns his attention to witchcraft in Blood Witch. So, what's the story? It primarily focuses on a couple of journalists who work for an American magazine who come over to the UK to investigate a series of missing persons where witchcraft has been accused of being responsible, or at least part of what's going on. So they end up staying in this kind of like rustic Airbnb, and the owner gives them some information about this kind of local legend about these witches that were killed, centuries before. Inevitably, they investigate and find there may well be some truth to these rumours, but there also may be a wider kind of situation going on with some kind of corporate types wanting to promote an occult kind of agenda. Anyway, what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss Blood Witch. Okay, so I wasn't the biggest fan, it must be said, of Nest of Vampires and Werewolf Cabal, which I previously reviewed here. So how does Blood Witch fare? I'm going to say right off the bat I actually preferred this movie to the other two. And the interesting thing with this one, it's certainly a less flashy movie. I mean, with the Blood Witch, we don't have necessarily particularly on-screen creatures and things like that. But where I think this movie succeeds, in my opinion at least, where, for example, Nest of Vampires and Werewolf Cabal failed, was it builds up a more genuine creepy atmosphere. The pace of the movie is a slow movie, but I do feel the movie has more of a confident pace behind it, but a slower one, but one that does build on a reasonable amount of prepping and kind of atmosphere. So we are aware that there is some type of supernatural presence within these woods, a ghostly witch perhaps, or witches, and a lot of it is done through, I think, some eerie photography, some reasonable kind of like sound VFX. So not necessarily kind of stuff that you're seeing on screen, but just kind of this slow sort of creeping dread. I think that goes a long way in creating this kind of spookier atmosphere that this movie benefits from. I'd have to say also I think the movie benefits from having some better acting. Now, I'm going to caveat that by saying not everyone, it is a mixed bag, and even those who I think do a reasonable job here, they're not going to be sitting next to De Niro in 2027's Oscars. But the main roles here are a couple of journalists, our house owner, and even the kind of the prologue couple. I believe them in their roles. They were good enough for me to believe them in their roles. And for a kind of a low budget B movie, I don't think anyone is necessarily expecting an Oscar worthy performance necessarily, but they were good enough. They were believable enough where I could buy their characters, what they were kind of doing and things like this. So I actually found their characters to be quite grounded and quite kind of believable, especially our homeowner, who I think does actually probably my favourite performance, where you're not quite sure if he is got something to hide, and if he has got something to hide, is he trying to help, or is he sort of somehow involved in the kind of the proceedings? I think it's on the surface of it, he seems like quite a genuine type of guy. But you know, there's enough there where you start to question, is he got something to hide? And you know, I'm not going to tell you the answer to that, but you know, I thought again, the acting there was to a reasonable standard, I would say. So. What about the actual kind of like the horror elements itself? There are a couple of kind of gore sequences. They are kind of low tech and low budget, but again, we're not trying to create, you know, super elaborate creature effects like say we did with the demonic movies or the werewolf movies prior to this. And as such, the nature of the kind of the VFX is more subtle, and therefore doesn't kind of like look as bad, because obviously it is a very low budget movie. You're just having kind of like women wandering around in the kind of the misty woods and things like this. So, but looking kind of goth and stuff. So there's I mean there are some kind of elements that don't work as well, but there's a couple of kind of practical effects that I thought were okay. So the story itself as well, I gotta say, I think was reasonably interesting. Even our kind of our prologue kill, actually we have quite a lot of time spent with this couple, to the point where I actually thought they were our main characters. So the characterization is better as well, I would say, for the most part. So the general story, you know, it's simple, it's nothing elaborate. And there are some elements that don't work, which I'll come on to. But I think that the A storyline, at the very least, was interesting, and done with kind of a more subtle hand, a more kind of like a more feel for kind of atmosphere, rather than kind of like trying to have shocking moments and things like that, which I think benefits this movie. Okay, what doesn't work? So let me just come back to some of the things that I've mentioned. Let's talk about the acting. So, as I've mentioned, I think the main characters here are all fine. Everyone here who you get a reasonable amount of screen time, I think does a decent job. But there are some kind of like smaller roles where the acting is not as good, and I would say some of these performances go from below average down to downright terrible, which. Thank God they're not like bigger roles, to be honest, but they're not good. There's also the inclusion of the dreaded remote roles. So I'm presuming this movie was partially crowdfunded, and you know, rewards were given to certain people who have donated to have like this remote role. And I find this as a, you know, as I always say, it's fun for the person involved. But when you are watching this as a movie not connected to any of that, I always feel these sequences, the majority of the time, kind of stop to have this kind of like scene crowbarred in. The acting obviously is not from anyone who really has any acting experience and things like that, so it always feels a little awkward. And it does it about 3 times, I think, this movie. So yeah, the acting is a mixed bag. Thankfully, our main characters, I think, fare better. The A storyline, I would say, is interesting. However, there are a few B storylines which I think are less well thought out and somewhat convoluted. So the decision here to have this be an American magazine that sends these journalists out, I'm presuming this is to try and appeal to American audiences, but it's obviously clearly not filmed in America, and the acting isn't good for a start. But that storyline is so ill-conceived and feels so convoluted and just kind of poorly put together. They should have just cut it out, or just have a lot less scenes, just them sending them us out as journalists. But we keep cutting back, and these scenes are awful. They're just awful, and don't make any real sense. They're poorly conceived, poorly executed, poorly acted, and just bring the film down as a whole. There are a few kind of elements within the movie, if we're being a little nitpicky here, that I feel again, could have been done a little better. Like, we're meant to believe this, these killings or disappearances of various people have taken deep within the woods. But we see, like, you know, sequences filmed in the woods, and they look like they're next to like an open field. So like the woods that are back onto like a field, so it's clearly not like deep within the woods. They mention this takes place in Warwickshire, which is kind of in the middle of England. Yeah, so again, there's a couple of sequences where we're meant to believe we're deep in the woods, and it's clearly not, you know. And there's some artifacts that just happen to be kind of lying around in the woods that are centuries old but look brand new and things like this. So again, there's a few things here. The final act of the movie as well was weak. We kind of wrap up our A storyline, which introduces a couple of other characters, which was poorly handled. It kind of wraps up a little bit too quickly, and then it spends more time dealing with more of the B storylines. And there's some poor VFX involved in these elements, and the story is not as interesting and poorly executed as I've mentioned. So how does the film stack up as a whole? I mean, I think with an edit, this movie could possibly be a bit more, you know, of a better movie. But as it stands at the moment, I would give this a 5 out of 10, which is the highest that I've rated out of these Chris Sanders films so far. But it does have some elements which I think are genuinely quite intriguing and spooky. But it is let down by some elements, some story elements in particular, that just don't fit. There needs to be really a producer, I think, on these movies to say, no, that's not a good idea, don't do that. Or maybe the actors or something are trying to, you know, incorporate their ideas. For whatever the reason, there are some elements here that I think could have been better thought out. So as it stands, it's a 5 out of 10. It's not a bad movie. I actually enjoyed this to a point. But yeah, not a classic by any stretch. Have you seen Blood Witch? What were your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
All hail the Geek Legion of Doom!